Welcome to Love Your Life, Love Your Job podcast. I'm joined today by Kieran, and Kieran is a chief people officer and has worked across different sectors. And rather than me kind of give you or try and give an overview of Kieran, it's probably easier, Kieran, to hand over to you. Do you want to just give yourself a quick introduction to the audience?
Sure. Cheers, James. So I'm Kieran. I'm a chief people officer. I work as my own consultant under kieranmander.com. And I worked a number of different assignments, both here in the UK and internationally as well. Spent several years out in the UAE. My claim to fame is opening the first IKEA store in Africa. Who knew that they needed IKEA in Africa? Yeah, and probably 20 plus years of HR experience in different sectors: aviation, travel, tourism, retail, distribution, gaming, tech. So lots of experience to hopefully share and connect the dots with today.
Brilliant. And look, welcome to the podcast. And what we're going to do today is actually we've got a really interesting conversation. Kieran's just kind of alluded to it there, connecting the dots. What, as you know, those that have seen my podcast in the past, Love Your Job, Love Your Life is all about helping people to really step back and look at how can you help an organization, or how can you help yourself to really help the employees to love their life more. Kieran and I were having some interesting conversations a little while back, and he has this really simple concept, which I absolutely loved, called connecting the dots. So that's what we're going to talk about today, and we're going to explore it and see what bring that to life ultimately. But Kieran, let's start sort of quite big with this question. Why is it so important that the C-suite kind of connect the dots down through an organization? Now, that's a very broad question, and you may want to kind of give a brief summary of what you mean by connecting the dots. But why is it so important that the C-suite connect it down through an organization?
Yeah, sure. I think at the moment there's lots of conversation going on around the role of HR in the C-suite and how HR adds value. And there's lots of hate on LinkedIn at the moment around the HR function. I see, which is quite despairing to some degree. But for me, the HR people that are doing the greatest jobs really are those that are connecting the dots. We've got a voice at the table, hopefully, with those C-suites that are making key decisions for a business, both commercially and for the people that are working in that organization. And so for me, it's about how do you get them to understand what's going on in an organization and understand what's going on at the grassroots. And very often HR are those people that are having the conversations with people on the grassroots at whatever level in the organization, or at least they're getting the kind of feedback loops from their own HR teams, the HR BPs, the HR operations teams that are working out there. So they get to hear firsthand what's happening. If you're clued in and you're linked into the organization, you get that mood music much quicker. And so I think that the HR role is being able to take that mood music, interpret it, and then being able to feed it back to the C-suite and kind of go, actually, this is what's really going on in the organization. These are the things that we need to help fix or to resolve, to help oil the wheels on the organization, to make it more commercial, to make it more effective, and to help move things forward. So I think it's that macro versus the micro element and how you bring all that activity together that connects the dots essentially for C-suite to understand what's really happening in an organization. I think sometimes they get a bit focused on a spreadsheet or the figures or all that kind of stuff. So having a bit more thought around the implications of chasing this KPI or that KPI is really important.
And I suppose, as you say, I mean, because this is also quite interesting. It's not only is it the people and understanding the people and the sentiment of what's going on in the organization, it can kind of go the other way as well. That sort of, why is it important the other way round? Why is it important that the C-suite connect the dots down? Because, as you say, often, and we'll talk about this probably in a little bit more detail, but often, they get stuck behind you can call it the helicopter view, the 10,000 feet view, the spreadsheet, dare I say it, the P&Ls and all of the data that everyone has visibility of now. But actually, how are they connecting the dots down to help the employees feel like they know where they're going, what they're doing?
Yeah, I remember being in the UAE working out there, and they classed there was an experiment where they're titling the HR function as the happiness function, which I kind of was kind of interesting, kind of unique, kind of different. And I think we've moved away from the personnel brigade, but I'm not quite sure we've got to the happiness brigade just yet. I think it's somewhere in the happy medium that you need to get to. So that level of kind of connecting the vision and the mission of what the organization is about and what they're trying to do and create that sense of hope, I think is what is really important for HR to kind of cascade that down. And that might sound a little bit simplistic, but sometimes people need to feel that they have like purpose when they're coming to work. I think I've got some facts in front of me here. If I kind of look to my right, that's what I'm doing. But there's some really interesting facts and figures. But people are far more likely to be engaged in the work human 2023 if they have meaningful work. And so how do we connect the dots for that to help them feel like they've got meaningful work, that they feel happy and engaged to come to work? And like you say, okay, it might be bottom line, and guys in the city want to make the double digit growth, but you need to make sure you're connecting it into a vision, and people feel like that they're having something to come to work and add value to in the world. I think particularly with younger generations, Gen Z, for example, I think that for sure is a much more important activity than just salary or the benefits that you might take home as well.
Yeah. And look, there's another big conversation there, isn't there? We only have to look at what people now are looking for when they come to work, and rewind the clock 10, 15 years, and money was often the big driver of how much more am I going to get paid to move from company
Yeah.
X to company Z. Now that has fundamentally shifted, and probably, I don't know the data or the stats around this, but I would say pay is probably number 3 or 4 now on the list. It might be on your chart.
I think pay is number 2 on the chart, but it's
Right.
interesting. I mean, like the amount of adverts you now see on LinkedIn where you kind of see hybrid working as a benefit as opposed to a taken for granted. And you also see the number of surveys that are going on at the moment with it is a hybrid, is the lack of hybrid working or the ability to work remotely a no for a job. So would you not consider a job if you can't work remotely? And again, you can see it in the different generational demographics that is a key decision maker on whether or not they want to
Yeah.
take a job.
Yeah. Now we've kind of probably gone a little bit off piste and gone off into a general conversation. So I'm going to pull it back a little bit. You talked about, so connecting the dots for you is very much around making sure that there is connection kind of almost across every part of the business, whether that be cross peer to peer, whether that be up, whether that be down. It doesn't really matter. It's about making sure everybody is connected. Kind of now we kind of with that approach though, Kieran, it makes sense, right? And it sounds a very simple thing to do, keep everyone updated, but how do you approach this? Like when you're working with organizations, and I know you've done some great kind of interim work and changing the perception of businesses, etc. But how do you actually bring this to kind of life and implement it in an organization without giving away your trade secrets, obviously?
I think one of the first things that I tend to do when I go into a new client, I kind of spend probably the first couple of weeks in listening mode. And it sounds like it's a bit kind of blasé, but it is really listening. It's almost I'm interviewing each of the people that I'm meeting and asking some pertinent questions about what's going on and how's things working here and what's the stuff that is doing really well and what's the secret sauce as such, and then what are the things that are kind of causing trouble. And people openly tell you very easily what's going on and what the problems are. And so actually as a consultant, it's actually quite easy, for want of a better word, to kind of go, actually, here's what your employees are telling you. These are the problems that are out there. And then it's being able to package all of that into a way that you kind of go, here's a storytelling that we tell about that. Here's how we fix it, and here's actually how you kind of talk about that for the future growth. I've done that in a number of different organizations. I think about Rank, for example, there was lots of stuff around their customer service that just wasn't working. And I've never worked in the gaming industry before, so it was kind of fairly new. But getting in there, asking those questions, what's causing the problems? CEO was jumping up and down about the fact that the call wait times for some of our call centres were just through the roof. Like hand off points for 5 or 6 points of contact. You're looking at perhaps 15 to 20 minutes to answer a call. And actually, we're about the company, the Rank was about having fun and being able to get people to play and to use their money to have fun. And so having a conversation with a customer service director, you realize that we haven't got voice over internet protocols. We haven't even got a tracking system that manages their customer service. That when I came from OVO, it was just common knowledge, all the customers that they have to deal with. And so you bring that industry knowledge from one business to another, and you go and just get them to spend time in that customer service environment and connecting the different dots, kind of going, oh wow. And it was great. They nurtured talent, and the talent had come up through the ranks, but that is all they knew. And so being able to expand the horizon, go and see things in a different organization and connect dots with how things are done professionally in a different place, it was really great. And I think for me, that's something that from working in lots of different industries, you're able to bring that. Perhaps if you'd have been in that industry only, you wouldn't have known any different. And so therefore you couldn't have provided them the solutions to be able to help them move that forward. So it's thinking about connecting the dots in one environment, but also in a broader environment as well, and across industry, I think.
Yeah, and look, one of the things that I talk about quite a lot from an engaged to succeed perspective is exactly that. It's about communication. It's about, it's simply even from a leadership perspective with their team. What kind of conversations are you having with your people?
Yeah.
And I'm now trying to rack my brains with some stats, but it's something like, I think it was like 1 in 5 people, or I think it might have been 1 in 7 people have an effective conversation with their manager on a weekly basis. And when you think about that 1 in 7, what actually does that mean? You talked about meaningfulness at the beginning of this conversation.
Yeah.
If you're not having an effective conversation with your manager, how meaningful are you to them, and how
Yeah.
meaningful is the job to you?
Scary.
So it's really scary, some of the stats that sit behind it. But it
Yeah.
comes back to a degree. It comes back to what you're saying, which is, how do we do this stuff? Whether it be connecting the dots, whether it be engagement, whether it be development, a lot of it sits at the heart of it is general communication, having a two-way dialogue about stuff
Yeah.
in a transparent, open way. You've got to build that safety, but in that transparent, open way.
Yeah. So on that point, Gallup, 2024 State of the Global Workplace Report. So they were saying only 10% of the UK workforce is actively engaged in their work. So that means 90% are in some way disengaged. And that's kind of scary. And you look at the government problems at the moment in terms of productivity and how we improve productivity across the UK. We get people back into work, and that it just echoes across, because there's no vision, there's no hope, there's no, like, how do I get involved and be actively engaged in what I'm doing, and feel like I'm adding value some way, some shape or form. I have to admit,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
loved working out in the UAE. So well, 10 years ago now, I guess, but the UAE did a lot of work around their 2030 vision. And so the 2030 vision, no matter where you worked, whether you worked in the education sector, whether it was industry, whether it was kind of aviation, which is where I was working at the time, everything was designed around 2030 and being able to turn off oil. And I'm not sure whether they'll actually get there by 2030, but everyone to some degree felt like they were able to contribute to the environment, to the economy, to a purpose in terms of the organization. And they did lots of work around communication, whether it be induction into a business or an area, through to the communication that went out across the UAE. So people felt like they were being engaged with some of that. And I think the UK particularly, we don't do that very well. I think the last time people felt engaged maybe was the Olympics. And maybe when you get some of the big national events like a coronation or something, we kind of get a bit proud and excited. But yeah, it feels like we haven't got that vision and hope in the UK that perhaps we need to, whether that's a very big political macro level through down to the world of work, down into the guy in finance has to do the accounts. Like, how do we make that make sense for them across the jobs that they're doing?
Yeah. Yeah, the Olympics is an interesting one. I always used to talk about the Olympics and say, how do you bottle up all of that? When you think about the number of volunteers, you think about the way that everybody acted, the
Yeah.
support that everyone gave each other. When you think about that as an event, how do you bottle that up and take that into a corporate world? And
Yeah.
for me, it came back to the simple thing that we've just been talking about. It's meaningfulness. It's putting meaning behind it. This is
Yeah.
this is a major event. It's being shown globally. We want it to be the best in the world. We
Yeah.
need the people there to help us to do that. And people just went, yeah, I'll do it. I'll do it. I'll do it. And that was the meaningfulness that sat behind it that drove that level of engagement. And of course,
Yeah.
we have to remember that the volunteers, I seem to remember the volunteers were actually volunteers. No one got paid to do it, did they? So
Yeah. But the
So
sense of hope and the sense of
yeah,
commitment and the community that was driven from that was kind of like it's tangible. You could feel it almost around the country, and like we need more of that. And whether that's in the national front or whether it's in a workplace, it's that level of engagement that you get when people are committed to a purpose and to
yeah,
meaningful
yeah,
work.
yeah, absolutely. Look, and I suppose this is often the big challenge that organizations face, isn't it? It's how do we've talked about the why is important. Yeah, absolutely. We've talked about how you can do it through communication. This is not necessarily anything what I would call earth-breakingly new. It's always been the same. When I think about leadership courses that I went on 15 years ago, they were
Yeah.
talking about being open and creating an environment and me helping create an environment that people want to follow you, not you lead them. They want to follow you because they're inspired by you. That's the key of this. But to get that, you need to have that open communication. We both know, Kieran, obviously you from a CPO perspective, from the work that I do around Engage to Succeed, we know though that it sounds very simple, right? Connect the dots, talk more, have open communication, build an environment of trust, psychological safety, no problem, easy. But we also know there are a whole host of challenges and barriers that we have to overcome
Yeah.
sometimes to get there. So again, from your experience, what are some of the sort of the big barriers that you've had to overcome when you're talking about this in an organization around connecting the dots and building that, I suppose, ultimately building that trust and awareness around it?
Yeah, it's a difficult one because there's no one silver bullet, is there? If you had that, I think we'd all be fixed, right? It'd be easy. I've definitely worked. I remember one particular. I won't name the company that I worked for, but they were a tricky company to work for, and they had all of these amazing pictures all over the walls in their offices talking about the values and stuff. You walk in at first glance, and the product is shiny and exciting. The walls are exciting, all these values on, and then you kind of get into the nitty gritty of working in that environment, and you kind of realize that actually the business is the anti of the values of what they had on the wall, and there is all this underhandedness and kind of people trying to one up each other. It was probably one of the nastiest environments I've ever worked in, and that the only thing you can hold on to is a really great manager there. And I kind of remember doing a coaching session with him and saying, actually, what I would class you as an umbrella manager, because literally you put your umbrella up and you kind of bring your team in underneath that umbrella and you kind of umbrella them from the shit that's going on around you, and you try and protect them as much as you can, and and to some degree talk about the culture as openly as you can do, to kind of go, this is how it is. And I think once you get into that and you kind of realize this is how it is, you kind of, okay, I can adapt to it and adopt to it and figure out how things work. And it was very different geographies that kind of meant there was different cultures within those different geographies that you had to kind of work with as well. So that I think was quite difficult. So the umbrella manager, I think, was really helpful. But I think the one that I always go to, and I've done this in my most previous role actually, is the level of empathy and being authentic. So I think you have to come and be authentic as much as possible. You talk about the shit and the good stuff as well as the kind of the bad stuff in there as well, and how you kind of play that through. And I think sometimes the people expect HR to be kind of all fluffy and like it will make it look pretty and good and put some soft colorings on it or whatever. And reality, actually having those really difficult conversations to kind of go, we're not meeting budget, we're not going to be able to pay a bonus, and being really honest about what that means. Whereas some of the C-suite weren't having those conversations, and when we don't talk about it, be fine, I'll ignore it. But actually being able to talk about it and actually get people engaged. We're not making the money. Well, these are the things we think about. How can you help us to do that? Is a way different conversation, because you're engaging them in that vision and hope and meaningfulness, as opposed to ignoring it and don't ask those questions and all that kind of good stuff. And so you have to role model that, I think, in terms of being able to ask those questions. I remember being in a auditorium, probably 150 senior managers in one of the businesses I worked in, and kind of put my hand up, like, no, maybe I kind of plucked up the courage and then put my hand up and asked the question, and you could kind of see everybody go, oh, I can't even remember what the question was now. It wouldn't have been that important, but I do remember everybody kind of going, he's asked the question. I think it might have been about pay review, to be fair. It's the one that probably drives most of it. And to be fair, the C-suite squirmed a little bit, kind of didn't really answer it, but kind of gave an answer. But at least people got to hear it and kind of go, okay, well, now I can make sense of it and deal with it as I want to. But yeah, it's the tricky one. So I think there's a couple of things, like, as I said, manage the team and the environment, the culture that you've got around you, role model, be authentic, and kind of do as much as you can from that point of view. And probably the last one do is the calling out part. So when you see it not being role modeled or something that isn't kind of adding value, then kind of call it out and have those more difficult conversations. Because unless you do that, then you're part of the problem as well.
Yeah, and I think that is often the I say it's often the problem. It's often one of the problems. It's there are not many, and I'm going to use the word brave. There are not many brave people out there that will put their hand up and ask those tough questions or challenge the people that are at the top.
Yeah,
And you might do if you're at a senior leadership level and you've got a room of senior leaders. But if you are somebody further down the organization,
yeah,
they tend to stay to say nothing, or they tend to ask something that isn't going to get someone's back up or be controversial or whatever. They
yeah,
tend to ask the nice questions of, what did you get up to on the weekend?
yeah,
So rather than the tough one of why are we not getting a pay review this year or something like that. But anyway, but
yeah,
it's a common issue, and that's often can be one of the reasons why people leave organizations, right? That they say, well, I don't see change, or we're not getting the right kind of responses around what we're doing, or and when you actually dig deep and you say, well, have you asked the question? Well, no, I've not asked the question. Well, why not? And just a very quick story. I had somebody that I worked for quite a few years ago, and it's always stuck with me, this one, because it's quite a unique one. He said one of his key messages to his leadership team was this: I want you to come into work every day and try and get fired.
it's a good challenge.
And we went,
Not sure for HR, but anyway.
okay. And he was saying it in a jokingly way, but he said, just think about it. He said, if you think about it logically, what do you need to do for me to turn around to you in the Alan Sugar style and go, James, you're fired? And let's be honest, you've got to do something pretty horrendous for that to happen. But the reason he was saying it was to encourage people to speak up. He was encouraging people to be open and honest about how they were feeling. And he also backed it up with exactly what I've just said is, the likelihood of you actually getting fired is probably 0.0000001%, because
Yeah,
actually you're only going to come to me with stuff that you have passion about changing. And if you're passionate about changing it, somebody else is passionate about changing it. So he flipped it, but it's a really interesting concept. And not many people think they're going to get fired for something that there is absolutely no way they would ever get fired for.
yeah,
But it was just to encourage that, as you're talking about, Kieran, to encourage that, be bold, be brave, be open, and share and talk. Because if you do, that helps us move the business forward. If you say nothing, we know nothing.
yeah, yeah,
So
absolutely.
yeah, it was an
It's
interesting one,
interesting.
though.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's an interesting conundrum. I think I felt different since I've been back in the UK. I've been back now for nearly 8 years. With the UAE, I was out there for nearly 10 years. And your lifestyle, your visa, your family, your house, everything is attached to that visa. So the psychological safety element is a different level, because actually you don't want to rock the boat too much, because not only can I just lose my job, but I could lose my visa, my house, my ability to live in the country. And I think that was interesting, because it does drive a different behavior out there as well. And so that level of how much do I push the barrier, how much do I raise my hand, I think is much higher there, I think, than perhaps the UK. I mean, at the end of the day, you could lose your job here, but you don't get deported. So yeah, it's slightly
Yeah,
different.
yeah. So kind of what we often see, and we touched on this a little bit a little while ago, but what we often see is disconnect. We see disconnect between whether it's it can be the C-suite. It depends on the size of the organization, Karen, but disconnect with the C-suite and the employees, or the senior leadership team and the employees. And whether that is a disconnect between the meaningful message, or whether that's a disconnect between expectations, it doesn't really matter. But there is a disconnect. And sometimes I think, and it'd be interesting to get your view, and we'll talk about the disconnect in a minute, but sometimes I think executives don't see the disconnect happening,
Hmm.
but also employees don't see what the executives are truly like, and they don't necessarily realize that they don't see that disconnect. So often we see it. It is a really weird conundrum to try and overcome. But from your experience, what are the best ways to try and get, we've talked about trust, we've talked about communication, we've talked about a lot of things here, but is there anything that really works around actually connecting everybody up in an organization? So if you take the example where you went into the worst ever in organization with one manager within an umbrella. How did you start connecting that to help people realize the impact of it if they became more connected, what would actually happen?
Yeah. I think that there's I've worked with a few organizations where they've really taken on board kind of that opportunity to really connect the dots. I worked with Ovo for a little while, and they were amazing at their communication, a really great communications team. I think that Ovo had that kind of young entrepreneurial feel. The CEO, Steve, is like the UK version of Elon Musk to some degree. He's kind of got that entrepreneurial feel about him. And so you had Ovo, which is kind of 500 people strong, kind of Bristol based, young, vibrant kind of environment. And they had bought Southern Scottish Electricity, which was a utilities company, I think 13,000 people strong. Literally would get a warning if you didn't hold the handle down, that go walking down the stairs. And so you had these two very different cultures coming together and trying to be able to, it's like literally the mouse eating the elephant and trying to get them to work together. And so there was a huge piece of work in terms of being able to move that culture forward and to be able to get them to work in a very different way. Again, similarly, their touch points were 7 or 8 people, 20 minutes on the phone before you got through to a call handler that you could deal with. There were teams of 20 people, 2 of them, that were dealing with just customers who had died. And so their job all day long was dealing with bereaved families and people, being able to deal with it. And so as soon as you had one of those calls, it went straight through to this kind of call handling team. And so like, it was a really sensitive job. It was a really depressing job, bless them. But actually being able to change the way that we worked around that, being able to have everybody trained to be able to deal with that call, as opposed to being able to hand off to this specific team, was really, really important. There was this huge piece of work around creating Ovo's vision about what they wanted to do going forward, being the green champion in the UK, the energy supplier of choice for the UK. So their vision was really bold and kind of impassioning. Their visuals were really good. They've got that big green logo, and they would talk about belonging as one of their key values, not just about inclusion, but belonging. So I think that the difference in those words creates a different feel in terms of how you feel about being part of that environment. And so the C-suite were all set up against that. They understood it. They talk about it in their town halls and their meetings. There was one particular chap, I'll name check him, and Joe Gordon was just amazing at being able to talk about that from a human point of view with employees, and would have fun and being able to talk about the vision and what they were trying to create, and still talk about some of the pain points that were going on. We haven't done this, we haven't done that. We know this phase of the change and transformation hasn't gone very well, and we're trying to fix it. We need your help to help us through that. So that communication level, and it was frequent, so it'd be once a week, kind of having those communication sessions, was really, really impactful for people. And so they felt included, they felt like they belonged, they felt like they were being part of the journey. And I think that made a huge difference in being able to kind of take people along on that journey. Taking the old badge off of a Southern Scottish electricity provider and having a new Ovo badge and feeling part of that family was really, really important. So the induction program, the way that they were working through their customer service journey, was really, really important. And then you feel like that was moving in the right direction as well.
Yeah, that's a great example, Kieran, of how you do it well. And I
Yeah,
think often organizations, going back to one of your earlier examples, they have this vision and they put it on the wall, and they have their values that sit underneath their vision, and they just expect it to happen. And these things don't happen. It's
yeah,
like when I talk to organizations about my Engage to Succeed model, it's, I'm very clear with them and say, look, you all have to buy into this from the top down, because if you don't, you'll never embed, because everyone needs to see that behavior, that openness. It's okay to be, and using my terminology, it's okay, even if you're the CEO, it's okay to be on a roller coaster ride for a day. And it's okay to share that with people, because you're human.
human. Yeah, exactly that. Exactly that. Exactly that.
Even though you're the CEO, you can't be flying high 100% of the time in all of your life, because it doesn't, life, and show me somebody that does. Life doesn't necessarily allow you to do that, because there is always a curveball or a challenge or
Yeah,
something that comes up. But it's how do you deal with it, and how do you help people to make sure that they can see it, they can buy into it, they can belong, and they can be part of that journey. And
yeah,
I think the belonging piece is so refreshing. I was talking to somebody else the other day around DE and I was like, well, you know, what is D&I nowadays? Because I'd love someone to define it. It's actually not D&I. It's about belonging. It's about the culture of the organization. Is everyone belongs here? It doesn't matter who you are, where you're from. It's
Yeah,
just about that belonging piece. And they went,
yeah,
that's a really interesting way to view it.
yeah.
So that's really powerful
I
that
love that.
Obo are doing that. So look, there's been some really great nuggets of information in here, Kieran, and time is disappearing. And what I'd love to ask you as a final takeaway for anyone that's listening is, this is an interesting debate around connecting the dots, and it's a really great, and as we talked about before, it's a really great approach to driving that forward and helping people. What would be anyone that's looking at this? I mean, what would be your final tips, hints, closing remarks? I mean, clearly the big one is just pick up the phone to me and I'll come and sort it out for you, as in Kieran will come and sort it out for you. But any other kind of hints or tips that you want to share with people that they could start thinking about this in a slightly different way?
Yeah, I think there's the HR spectrum is massive actually when you think about it, and from reward and benefits through down to employee relations and policies and things, that how you frame all of that stuff helps to build that vision. And from the way that you word your policies, I went through a piece of work at one business where we just reframed policies, the way that we talk to employees, a bit more colloquial, a bit more kind of how we talk to each other, kind of policy writing, and including in that was the vision and mission for an organization. So everything from policy to reward and benefits to employee relations to your recruitment process. So you want to be reiterating and communicating that vision, mission, and purpose firstly and foremostly, and making sure you're really clear about what that means practically for people, whether they're working in finance or kind of the janitor in the organization, so everyone feels like they belong to that element. I think there's some other real important things as well. Some data analytics is really, really important. I think being able to measure what you're doing is really, really important. So whether it's a once a year engagement survey or more frequent pulses, and being able to bring all that stuff together, I think is really important. And being able to track and measure and see what you're doing. And I think I always use the Ghana. I think it was for every 4 points on your engagement score, that's 0.1 of your bottom line being improved. So think about how you engage. That's the one that always sticks with me. But I think it's being able to connect the dots from being able to look at the helicopter view of the C-suite and the vision, both macro level of where that organization is in its environment and the way it's operating in, and the competitors and what's going on in the industry, through down to that kind of lowest denominator in the organization who's kind of working the phones or working a till or whatever that operation is doing, and being able to understand how they add value in all of that, and all of the HR elements that we're responsible for, like I say, recruitment through to payroll to all of that stuff. How does all of that journey all add up into making that make sense for someone in there as well? And as I say, how do you measure it over the top of all of that, I think is important.
Yeah, great. And the measurement piece is important. We can't get away from data, and we can't get away from kind of measuring things. We want to see improvements on everything we do.
Yeah.
And so, and let's be honest, again, it could be another stat on your wall, but we know that an engaged workforce has a 21%, I think it is, increased productivity level versus a disengaged workforce. So
Yeah.
when you relate that through to the bottom line, it can have significant impact.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. The one here is from MIT, but if you've got a toxic workplace culture, then you're likely to have 10.5 times more attrition rate than anybody else. So you can just see like
Wow.
the difference in attrition that coming through there. So if your attrition rate is kind of a bit high, then it's not rocket science to kind of go, there's something wrong here, but look at the culture and see what's going on. Particular, I remember when I was working for a bank once, and the attrition was high, 40% actually. It was really high. It was a fintech startup, lots of people coming and going, and they were going, "Oh, we're not paying people enough," and so they just kept fracturing up the money. And I was like, "No, it's not that." And they were like, "Yeah. This person's going because they've got more money over here." And I remember doing the survey and doing the exit survey and analysing the results, and literally coming back to them, kind of going, "Actually, the reason people are leaving is because they don't know what they're doing. They don't know how they fit into the vision that you're trying to create. There are so many different conflicting priorities. They don't know what to do, and they're leaving because they're going to go somewhere else that they can add value and know what they're doing. It has nothing to do with money whatsoever." And it was a revelation, because even around the table there, people were still disbelieving. And I'm like, the facts are the facts, people. So yeah, I remember having that very interesting conversation with that C-suite, and they're like, "Oh, okay, let's see how we can do something a bit different here." But yeah, and I did help level it out by talking about vision and purpose.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It's often I suppose my final remarks is it would probably be this to your vision and purpose is, when was, as an organization, when was the last time you looked at it? Because, you shouldn't change your vision and purpose every 6 months. Absolutely not, because it takes, what is it, 5 years to change the culture of a business roughly. So, but how often do you review that and say, how effective is it? How is it working? Is it resonating? Do people buy into it? And is it right?
Yeah,
Because if you're looking at launching a new product, you do a whole host of research before you actually launch the market. Do we do the same things from an organizational perspective? Not very often. I've worked in organizations where the vision is exactly the same, or in organizations 20 years ago, and the vision is still the same today as it was 20 years ago when I worked there. So
yeah,
you kind
yeah,
of sit
yeah.
there and scratch your head as to why they're not growing. But anyway, we'll leave that for another day, Kieran. Um, Kieran,
Thank
it's
you.
been an absolute pleasure to have you on this today, and a really
Yes,
great
James.
conversation. We could probably stand here and talk for about another hour on this stuff because we're both hugely passionate about the impact that connecting the dots or communication engagement has on a workforce. Fundamentally underpins everything that an organization does. The people sit at the heart of it. And I know you have to invest in technology and AI and data and all these other bits and pieces, but without the people, you don't have an organization. And that is the key message that I would leave with people with today. Kieran, just if anyone's watching and they want to get in contact with you, I will add your LinkedIn hyperlink below in the sections of the video. So if you want to connect with Kieran, hit the link, send a connection request. I'm sure he'll be delighted to pick up another conversation or a more detailed conversation around connecting the dots in your organization. Or if you just want to connect with him because you're fascinated by the work he does, I'm sure again he will be happy to be
Lots of
connected.
stories.
Lots of stories, lots of stories. Kieran, thanks again for joining me. Thank you everyone for listening. It's been great fun and look forward to talking to you again soon.
Cheers, James.